Good afternoon. My name is Lindsay, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the National 911 Program State of 911 Forum. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. Mr. Brian Given, you may begin your conference.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Given, and I'm National 911 Program Support. I'd like to welcome you to the first installment of the State of 911 webinar series. The purpose of these webinars is to bring together local, state, and federal 911 stakeholders to discuss current actions being performed in 911, in next generation 911, early adopters, success stories in transitioning to next generation 911 at all levels. And we're really going to hold these webinars every 2 months, and they're going to consist of 2 presentations, one by a federal level 911 stakeholder and one by a state level 911 stakeholder, followed by Q&A periods that everyone will get a chance to follow up with the presenters. For more information on this series, for future events and for recordings of past events, please check out www.911.gov. I'd like to talk a little bit about what's going to happen today. First 20 minutes, we will have Laurie Flaherty, the coordinator for the National 911 Program, discussing the guidelines for state next generation 911 legislative language and talking about the 911 legislative tracking database. Then we'll have a 10-minute Q&A, and then from 12:20 to 12:40, we'll have Roger Wilson, the chair of the Alabama Wireless 911 Board, discussing the Alabama Next Generation Emergency Network, followed by another 10-minute Q&A. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Laurie Flaherty, the coordinator for the National 911 Program.
Thanks, Brian. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. As Brian mentioned, I'll be talking about 2 things during the next 20 minutes or so. The first is a document that we have just released, Guidelines for State NG 911 Legislative Language, and a companion resource that is online, the 911 Legislation Tracking Database. Just to give you an idea of what I'll be covering in terms of the document, in terms of the guidelines, I'll be just mentioning a little bit about the background, the purpose of the document, how to use them, how the guidelines are presented in terms of format, how they were developed, and their contents, what the guidelines contains. This is one of many projects that was taken on by the National 911 Program at the behest of our stakeholders. Our MO at the National 911 Program is really to work with local, state, national, and federal stakeholders, both on the public and private side, and ask them what they think needs to be developed to support the implementation of NG 911 moving forward. And we listen to what you say. We use our resources to complete these projects and then turn them back over to you to use as you see fit in supporting and promoting 911 services nationwide. So on this project for the guidelines for state 911 legislative language, it's pretty clear that 911 stakeholders agree that it's time for next generation 911. But in trying to move forward, the current statutes don't necessarily enable the deployment of new technologies, and perhaps they don't allow the necessary level of coordination and collaboration that is necessary when you put these new systems and networks into place. Obviously, current 911 laws vary dramatically from state to state, and each state faces unique challenges. But regardless of where you are, NG 911 is likely to present significant challenges and require substantial changes in state statutes. So we brought together a project staff. We put out a competitive bid, and we procured the services of a contractor who did several things for us in terms of developing these guidelines. First, they looked at current statutes. They examined what was already out there in terms of current statutes and the issue areas that they represented. They did a lot of in-depth interviews with subject matter experts on the effect that NG 911 would have on the 911 systems moving forward and the implications that had for statutes. And then they tried to organize all that information in terms of key issue areas. I will tell you that along the way, they sought advice of stakeholders, not only in terms of a forum once they had put together a draft, but in every step along the way. And those stakeholders are listed in the document, but I would just like to acknowledge them because really without their support there would be no guidelines. There were representatives from what was then known as the 911 Industry Alliance, certainly from APCO, from Booz Allen Hamilton, from CTIA, from what was then the E911 Institute, from the Federal Communications Commission, from Entrado, from Kimball and Associates, from NASNA, from NASCIO, the National Association of State CIOs, the National Conference of State Legislatures, NENA, NISJIC, the National States Geographic Information Council, the National Association of Regulatory Utilities Commissioners, and the State 911 Alliance. Those are the folks that participated in the forum and sent a representative. There were a lot of subject matter experts that really put a lot into this document, and we thank them for their participation. Just so you have an idea of what the guidelines are and what they aren't, they are not an end-to-end model language, piece of language that can be submitted for legislative language. So you will not see language for a law from end to end in this document. Rather, what you will see is an inventory of issues to be considered with options for legislative language to address those issues. It's divided up into issue areas, and then for each one of those options, there is guidance, there are references, and there's background information for the use of each of those options. Just to give you an idea of what is contained in the document, it's divided up into several issue areas, and you can see the issue areas listed on this slide. And just to give you a little bit of a little more in depth in terms of what is contained in the document, under the statewide 911 governance structure, you'll find things like 911 as an essential government service, the state office and the state coordinator, the roles and responsibilities of both of those entities, the advisory body or advisory roles that are present in a lot of states and the roles and responsibilities for those bodies. There's also language related to regional and local authorities and the roles of other government entities in interacting with 911. In terms of the role of the state 911 office, that's probably the most in-depth section, probably the longest section, and what you will find in that part of the document is information including planning, coordinating with state agencies, with local governments and vendors, stakeholder involvement, issues related to operations, the regulatory role of the state 911 office, intergovernment relationships and contracting authority, providing technical assistance to local and regional 911 managers and authorities, and other issues like grant-making authority, data collection, interstate coordination and quality assurance or quality improvement, and public education. So there's a lot of information there. As I said, it's not an end-to-end law, but there is sample language available for you if in your state you find the need to update your statute in any of those areas. There's also a section on 911 funding, and that's broken up into revenue collection, fund distribution, oversight of 911 funds, and reporting responsibilities in terms of 911 funding at the state level. There are also sections on privacy and confidentiality, both in the collection and storage of information as well as how to share that information properly. There are issues related to reliability. And in an additional section that is not mentioned here but is also included in the document, there is a section on, there's often information included that relates to non-911 statutes. As most of you know, sometimes in the states, all of the laws that impact 911 are not necessarily in the 911 statute. So there's a section there that speaks to that as well. Just to give you an idea of how the guidelines are laid out, they're laid out primarily in two columns. And what you will find in the first column is the language, the options and examples for legislative language. And then running parallel to that in the second column are the guidance, the references, and the background information for each option and example. So that you have that available to you if in doing your own analysis you find the need to use any of these options for legislative language. There's also an extensive reference section at the back of the document. There are two separate appendices, one for general references and one specifically related to funding. So there's an awful lot of information there for you in your states that is usable as you're looking to update your statutes. So how would you use these guidelines? Well, as I mentioned before, it's not an end-to-end law that can be submitted for legislative action. It's rather an inventory that can be used by a regional or state government or 911 entity to really do an inventory of your statutes as they exist, compare them against the list of issues that are included in this document, and then decide for yourself whether or not any of the options or examples are appropriate for your state. Clearly, as you assess your state or territory's overall status, your current government and structure will dictate, which legislative actions are appropriate for you to consider. But this was really meant to be not necessarily an ideal language document, but rather provide a lot of examples for you to consider as you're moving forward in your state and use those or adapt them as appropriate. So we are, again, very thankful for the participation of all of the stakeholder organizations that gave us a lot of feedback, not only in terms of what to include, but the references. As I mentioned in the beginning, we did not write this document as a National 911 program, but rather we provided the forum for the stakeholders to write the document themselves. And so what you will see in the guidelines is the result of that cumulative knowledge and expertise. Many 911 laws don't account for the implementation of new technologies like NG 911, as you well know. And one of the things that we thought might be useful for the states moving forward as a companion reference to the guidelines would be an online database of laws as they are enacted in the states as they relate to 911. So at this point, what I'm going to be giving you is a brief description of the work that has been done by the National Conference of State Legislatures, who has developed a 911 online legislative tracking database, which will be available to you, is available to you, if you're trying to figure out what other states might be doing as in terms of updating their statutes related to 911. So the new legislative tracking resource is available, and it's there for use by whoever might be interested, whether you are a legislator, a state director, local or regional manager or 911 authority. It's there for you to use, and I'd like to thank NCSL. They've done a really great job with this product so far. And we partnered with them to create this searchable database of 911 legislation, and it includes laws that have been introduced and enacted in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. So let me tell you a little bit about that. It is searchable by, you can see the topics there. It's searchable by state, topic, keyword, status, bill number, sponsor, and summaries are available. And you can also find the full text of legislation through links to the various websites. There's also a history of the bill, current status, and the records are updated every 2 weeks to include action as it is taken by the different states to update their statutes. I'm not going to go through all the topics, but you can see there that it is pretty comprehensive in terms of the keywords that are used to find these legislative actions. And there is also someone at NCSL who goes over them to make sure that they fit into the database and for inclusion. The states are considering a variety of measures, but just to give you an idea of how much action there is out there, there are more than 300 bills just in this year alone related to 911 services that have been introduced in 42 states. And at least 114 bills relating to 911 services have been enacted in 36 different states. So there's a fair amount of activity going on out there in terms of updating 911 legislation. So again, it really sort of makes it even more useful to have a database of all these different actions. So this next slide shows you what the web pages look like on the NCSL website. Just to give you an idea of what you will find there, just for example, there are 10 states who have updated their statutes in terms of the responsibilities and membership of 911 boards and commissions in 2012 alone. There are 3 states that have updated their E911 or NG911 legislation. There are 5 states that have updated language of their 911 statutes in general. And there are 8 states that have enacted legislation with regard to prepaid wireless surcharges for 911 services. So you can do a query and search the online database to find information that is of interest to you. And in that page that you see on the right, what you will also find that NCSL has done is they've compiled for 2011 all of the legislation that was enacted related to 911, and it is listed by state. So again, if you're interested in finding out what the states have done, there's already a year's worth of information there available for you. And as 2012 comes to a close and we move on to 2013, they will compile a list for 2012 as well. So we are hoping that the guidelines and the legislation tracking database will be useful resources for you in the local and state 911 networks as you try and update your statutes to enable the implementation of NG911. If you are interested in either the document or the database, you can find them. There are links to them from the funding and policy page on 911.gov. So if you go to 911.gov and click on funding and policy, scroll down to the bottom of that web page, you'll see direct links both to the PDF of the guidelines and to the web page for the NCSL 911 legislative tracking database. So that's it for me. So I think we will open it up for questions now. If anyone has any questions regarding both of these resources, we'd be happy to take them now.
And at this time, I would like to remind everyone, in order to ask a question, press star and the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for just a moment to compile a Q&A roster. And again, if you would like to ask a question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. And there are no questions at this time.
Okay, I think we can move on to our second presentation for the day. And then if there are any questions at the end, we'll open it back up. So our next presenter is Mr. Roger Wilson, who's the chair of the Alabama Wireless 911 Board, and he will be discussing Alabama's next generation emergency network, or ANGEN. Roger, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Brian. I just want to appreciate the opportunity to discuss the ANGEN 911 project with each of you, and want to thank the 911 office, National 911 Office, for invitation to participate. Excuse me. Just a little bit of background on Alabama. The Alabama NENA chapter has always been an active and progressive group of 911 folks, and I'm proud to be a part of them. It was this group that took the leadership on IP in Alabama. We had just started the final phase of getting phase 2 wireless implemented in Alabama, and this leadership group got together and said, well, what's our next step? And we started talking about the IP network and where we wanted to go with that. And, of course, a lot of us were involved in the 911 Goes to Washington since day one, and we had met with our congressional delegation on a regular basis. And as we were going up there, we started hearing at the national level about the federal grants that were possibly going to be coming down for 911, and we wanted to be ready for it. So we got together, and one of the main criteria that we kept hearing about was the state plan. So the Alabama NENA chapter started working on it, and we paid for a consultant to help us draft our state plan for IP in Alabama. In Alabama, we do not have a state 911 office per se, but the governor had appointed several years back a person that would be designated as the state 911 coordinator. And that person was Art Faulkner. Art came from the 911 ranks several years ago as a director for Elmore County. Currently today, he serves as the Alabama Department of Emergency Management Director. And he still has that title as State 911 Coordinator. He's a good friend, a progressive type person, and at the time when the grant came down and we applied for it, he was working with the Alabama Department of Homeland Security, so he was able to convince them to apply for this DOT grant on behalf of the 911 districts across the state, and we were very fortunate to be awarded the $950,000 grant, but the kicker to it was that we had to match it dollar for dollar. So I was the chairman of the Alabama Wireless 911 Board. I was in a meeting that took place when they were talking about that, and the Alabama Department of Homeland Security was looking for an agency to administer the grant for them, and I told them I felt like that we could do that, and I carried it back to the Wireless Board, and they agreed to it. And we also made a special allocation out of our operating fund to the districts with local funds to come up with the match. So that's how we were able to get the grant, do the match, and move forward. The Wireless Board then went through the process. Okay, we've got the grant, and we had to start the process of an RFP. And we contracted with Auburn Montgomery Center for Advanced Technologies out of Montgomery to handle the RFP for us. They had handled some other RFPs for other state agencies, and we had met and talked with some of those folks, and they were well pleased with the outcome. So we contracted with them, and of course the Wireless Board appointed an ANGEN committee, which was made up of ECD, PSAP representatives, and plus we had technical people from the industry that were on there so that we could help develop the specifications that we needed for our RFP. As it went through the process, the ANGEN committee also evaluated all the RFP responses, and they were blind to who the respondents were to the RFP and the pricing until well over into the process. And when all the scoring and everything was done, they made a recommendation to the Wireless Board to go with iNetwork as our system service provider. Then the next step that we had is our IP network, which we're very fortunate in Alabama that the Alabama Supercomputer Authority has a robust and diverse backbone of network across the state. That basically it's there really for the schools, the elementary and public schools and the colleges and the state agencies. And we got in touch with the director, and he went to the board, and they said yes, they could see where as long as we paid for our bandwidth, we could be right on their network with them. And as you'll see here in a little bit, you'll see that we've got a strong backbone, strong network. We've got our 2 core call routing facilities located in Huntsville and Montgomery, which gives us either one of them can handle the whole state. So we've got, today where we've got the selective routers, neither one of them back up each other. This way, with our 2 core routing facilities, we're going to be able to back up across the whole state. And as you can see on the map there of the network, it goes, up to Nashville, it goes over to Atlanta, Huntsville, Birmingham, Montgomery, Mobile, and over to Dallas. And we just had some discussion with one of our neighbors in Mississippi. They're looking to say, can we just tie onto your network? And if that happens, then we'll be able to pull, we'll be able to get another leg over from here into the Mississippi area just to give it some more redundancy. What we're going to do from here is it'll go to the last mile. Everybody that signed on board with ANGN early on, we're going to pay for the last mile to connect from the backbone to their PSAP. The larger ones, or I'll say larger ones, even ones the size of me, I'm a population of about 70,000 here. We're going to, when we get it all ready to go, we'll put in another connection to have total redundant, diverse connectivity. We may get it from a traditional telephone, LEC, or then the next one may come from a cable provider. So we're looking at, we're going to try to make sure that we even get the last mile to be redundant. The network itself, like I said, we have it with ASA. The RFP process got us to iNetwork. They're going to be providing the 911 routing and the database. Presently, everybody, most people are using your traditional services provided by your local exchange carrier, and that's what we do here in Alabama. But we're going to go through this. We've looked at it. Currently, we've got 70% of our traffic that in the state is wireless. So we're going to move all our wireless traffic first. And we were in our phase 1, what we're doing is going to move all the wireless traffic over to the ANGN network and route the calls back to the PSAPs by the existing selective routers. Then the second phase is where we're going to start putting that the IP connections to the PSAPs, which is the last mile that I was talking about earlier. And, we've got several of them that's probably going to have legacy PSAP gateways. Not as many today as we originally thought, because we've had several of the districts have gone out and either have already purchased an IP switch or are in process of doing so. So that's reducing the number of the legacy PSAP gateways. Then we'll start routing the calls by IP to the PSAPs. Phase 3, which is the ultimate goal, is to convert everything, VoIP and wired carriers, over to it. Get everything on the ANGN network. And then once we do that, if we have a 911 call today, where I'm at, I've got 2 different LECs in the area. If my neighboring county gets a 911 call wireless and they have to send it to me, I don't get anything. All I do is get the caller, because they can't send me all the anti-alley information that comes with it. Well, under the IP network, we will. Plus, on the wireless calls, once we get through IP, where they're stripping off the reliability and confidence factors, we'll be able to get that. We don't get that today. So, it's going to be a more robust and diverse network As y'all know, we're in Alabama. We're faced with hurricanes down on the coast and tornadoes across the rest part of the state on an annual basis. And you know, under this NGN system, we will be able to direct calls from, say, if Baldwin County gets hit, we would be able to direct calls from that area inland to another PSAP to be able to handle the calls in a disaster or in a major incident. So, you know, with all the benefits and everything that we see, you know, we think that Alabama is going to be prepared for Next Gen 911 with our NGN network. And NGN's just the name that we came up with. You know, Alabama's, we were the first in the United States with, you know, have 911 in Hale-Level, Alabama. And we're probably not going to be the first with a IP network, but we're going to be one of the first. If anybody's got any questions at this time, I'll be glad to take them. Or if you would like, if you need any additional details or information, you can give me a call or send me an email.
And as a quick reminder, to ask a question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Your first question comes from the line of Ryan Dullen. Your line is open.
Yeah, are we going to have access to these slide decks?
This is Brian Given. You will. These slides will be posted on 911.gov following today's presentations. And a complete recording of today's webinar will also be posted on 911.gov.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Your next question comes from the line of Richard Taylor. Your line is open.
Good afternoon, Roger, and thank you so much for your presentation. I had a question for you regarding bandwidth. You mentioned early on in your presentation talking about the existing networks that were set up for the school. Did you run into bandwidth issues? I'm sure you had to have, and how did y'all address those issues?
I'm not really following your question on the network that we've got. We're going to have 10 gig across the state on the backbone, and then there's going to be 2 to each one of the PSAPs on the initial install, and then of course the larger ones, you know, will have the ability to get more.
Okay, so I guess where my question is going to, there's already existing users on that network with the schools.
Well, we're adding additional bandwidth to it for us.
Okay.
Ours is going to be we're just using their backbone. We're buying a segmented pipe for our traffic.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get to. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
And there are no further questions at this time.
Roger, this is Laurie. I have a question for you.
All right.
I noticed on the map that, you know, your network includes several states around you, and I'm just curious about what kinds of formal or informal arrangements you have with those states in order to establish that kind of network.
Well, see, the ASA, the Alabama Supercomputer Authority, when they built their backbone, they went to Atlanta because the Carrier Hotel was over there, and then they decided to go to Dallas for their other one. So that gave us that when we originally started talking to them, they basically all it was a backbone from Huntsville down to Birmingham, down to Montgomery, down to Mobile. And you know, several of us in 911, we had some reservations about that network because it was just in the state, you know, it was just straight down the state basically following I-65. But then when about 2 years had passed, they came back to us and they said, here, we want you to look at our new backbone now, and they showed us where they were going to Atlanta and going over up to Nashville and then over to Dallas. And then, like I said, the state of Mississippi has, when we had our state conference back in October, few of them come up to us and said, hey, we're interested in your engine. They had sat in on some of our presentations at the conference, and, you know, they were saying, hey, can we tie on to y'all? And I thought, hey, this would be ideal to make our network, our backbone, that much more robust and redundant.
That's great. Thanks, Roger.
Excuse me, this is the operator. You do have another question from the line of Richard Taylor. Your line is open.
Thank you. Roger, one last question from me. You mentioned the funding piece of it, and I know that you got the grant and did the match working with the local PSAPs. Going forward, how will the sustainability of this network be paid for, and who's going to be responsible?
That's a good question, Richard. The Alabama Wireless Board, in the state of Alabama, we do cost recovery, okay, for the wireless providers. And we are looking at 70% of our traffic is wireless, and the other 30 is wireline. And we pretty much have told the districts, you know, that the 30% that they're going to have to provide the funding to pay for that going forward, and the wireless would be paid out of the wireless side. And we had talked to all the wireless companies that are seeking cost recovery, and pretty much got buy-in on that, because it is a cost recoverable item.
Okay. Is there's going to be a time period, of course, where you're going to be running the legacy network as well as the IP, correct? That's
correct.
And
we've already took that into account, and we're going to pay most of that out of our operating fund.
Okay, great. Very good. Thanks.
There are no questions at this time.
Roger, this is John Charanti with the National 911 Program Support. Have you been working with any of the state radio network, land mobile radio network, and trying to provide some synergy in advance of the FirstNet rollout?
Well, the state of Alabama is trying to put a trunk radio system in across the state, and they have approached us on the part about using going in with us and getting bandwidth for the radio side, you know, from like Huntsville down all the way to Baldwin County, and we told them that we're willing to sit down and talk with them. Of course, they'd have to come up with a way to pay for their portion of it, because, you know. But as far as the FirstNet, I have not talked to anybody. I know what you're talking about, but I haven't had anybody contact me about it, you know, in the state of Alabama.
But it sounds like your network could certainly provide some backhaul support for other public safety needs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we had, you know, if you remember the BTOP grants?
Sure.
All right. Well, we had applied in round one and round two. We put together a program. We really felt good about it. We didn't get either one of them, but that was one of the things that we were trying to do with the BTOP funds. If we'd have got it, we were going to try to get it to where we had the 2-year colleges and 4-year colleges tied in with us, to where we could tie training, you know, do training over the network. We were going to be able to use like the State Emergency Management Agency and the State Health Department. We were, you know, if we get a bunch of 911 calls in a certain area during a severe weather situation, that information would pop up on a screen at the state EMA headquarters, where they would have an idea where the severe weather was hitting and what kind of severity based on the call volume. Of course, we didn't get those funds, but there was a lot of planning and everything that had been put in place for that we felt, well, there's a lot. I mean, the IP network actually is so robust that we see a lot of things down the road besides just 911. That it can benefit a lot of the other state agencies, federal agencies, where today everybody's trying to do their own isolated thing, and as we all know, when you do that, it costs more money. And we're trying to come up with a network and a system to where we can get the biggest bang for our buck and save everybody some dollars.
Well, thank you for that information.
Roger, this is Laurie again. The proverbial question that I feel compelled to ask. Now that you've done what you have done, which by the way is very impressive, looking back, is there anything you would have done differently if you'd known what you know now?
Yeah, we thought we had laid some pretty good groundwork with everybody. And looking backwards, I think that we would have probably slowed the process down just a little bit and brought people in on the front end and made sure they understood a little bit better about what we were trying to do. We thought we had, but looking back, I think maybe we could have slowed it down a little bit and been a little bit clearer. We still feel real comfortable with what we're doing, and a lot of the people, once we sit down and explain it to them, originally we have 88 911 districts in the state of Alabama. Okay, when we first started this thing, we only had 77 of them that had bought in, and now we're at 85, and I've talked to the other 3 this week, and I feel like before the first year, those 3 will be on. It's just, some people, when something new comes on board or comes out, people are, they're hesitant about getting involved. Nobody likes changes, where I'm the type person, if it's something that I think can be a big benefit to us, let's go for it. Where other people are, they're not that brave, I guess you could say.
Well, they're certainly the beneficiaries of your experience. Thank you for that.
So if there are no other questions, I'd just like to thank Roger and thank Laurie for participating in our inaugural State of 911 webinar. As you can see, we will be having one of these bi-monthly with our next event scheduled for January 24th, where we will have folks from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau in the FCC presenting, along with folks from Indiana's Enhanced 911. Further dates are confirmed. We're just waiting to finalize who will be presenting during those events. And as you can see on the right-hand side, registration will open for our next event December 17th. And we will be sure to get information out about these events for you all to register. And thank you all for attending this event. Like I said earlier, a recording of this webinar will be posted on 911.gov along with a PDF of the presentation slides. And if there are no other questions, again, here's Laurie's contact information. And if there is any questions about future webinars, about accessing the recording, accessing the slides, please email ng911wg@bah.com. And thanks again for attending.
This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect.